Citizens of the Grateful Nation, thank you again for tuning in. We have another episode. This is the 90th episode. We never thought we'd get here, but here we are. We're going strong. Just a couple words before we start. We're going to thank our new partner and sponsor, Heaven's Harvest. We don't have any ads written for them yet, but you saw we had them on our previous episode. You can go back and listen to Clayton Llewellyn, who's the founder and CEO of Heaven's Harvest. We had him on episode 89, and he talked about his company and what he provides. And if you haven't heard yet, they're an awesome food prepping and survivalist company. They order a whole bunch of products, from protein buckets of food to breakfast buckets. You could buy a whole bunch of buckets of food that will last you, I think, 25 years. They're good for a bunch of different water filtration products and accessories. I'm really excited to partner with them. They're really excited to partner with us. You can go to heavensharvest.com, use the code GREAT at checkout for 10% off of anything. And we're excited to be working with them. And we're excited to make more content in the coming months featuring their products. Also, guys, go to I'm Doing Merch and get yourself some merch. Help support the show. Thank you very much. And now we have a really, really interesting guest who is in the country of Singapore right now. He stayed up. It's 3:30 in the morning over there. But I found him through Franco Aurelio, a good friend of the show. This guy's really interesting. His name is Gabriel St Charles, and he goes by the Catacombs on Instagram. Is that it? Just the Catacombs?
The Catacomb Diaries, yeah.
The Catacomb Diaries. Here he is, Gabriel St Charles. Hello.
Hi, it's so great to be here, and it is worth staying up.
Is it? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you so much for staying up. We really do appreciate that. So I really don't know too much about you other than the clips that I saw you and Franco talking about a multitude of different subjects. But if you could you just give us, I don't know, a little bit of background about yourself, where you ended up in the world and what you do on the internet?
Well, it's always hard to kind of summarize everything, but I'm not too worried because I think throughout our conversation, we'll kind of cover lots of different stuff, and I'm going to tell my story through anecdotes and stuff like that. But I'm from Singapore. I somewhere along the line became really involved in the American conservative space. Long story short, sooner or later, I realized that, I'm kind of done with this. I realized that my faith was what was really important. And since then, I've kind of just pivoted into full-on just Catholic content. And right now, I'm kind of just hopping around the world. I work a remote job, and I'm really into the whole idea of minimalism and traveling light. So a lot of my YouTube content's going to be around that right now, besides the Catholicism, yeah.
So let's speak a little bit about Catholicism, because obviously it's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. I've seen a bunch of like the little shorts or little reels on Franco's feed, and I started to follow you and the things that you talk about. So I guess we're going to talk about a different multitude of subjects within Catholicism, but I wrote down a few questions. We do have some questions on Instagram, but the first thing that I wanted to ask you, and I have it jotted down here, is do you think if there's a necessity to bring Protestants to Catholicism, because I know you've spoken a lot about Protestantism, and you and Franco have spoken a lot about it with each other, but this thing I've been wondering specifically, because when I had Cliff I say Nettle is his last name, but I think it's Connectly. I had Cliff and Stewart on episode 88, and I asked Stewart, what are your guys' biggest objections to Catholicism? And he said, we really don't have one. It's just we're really concerned about your relationship with Christ. And I said, okay, that's fine. That's admirable. But what do you think? Do you think as Catholics, we should be bringing more people to the faith, even people within Christianity?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's a duty of Catholics to bring everyone in. And by everyone, that means everyone, Jews, Protestants, anyone who's not in complete communion with Rome, even the Orthodox, even if they are very, close brothers. And I think where the line is, and maybe why some might question that, would be that some Protestants would just be really, really stubborn about it. But I think when it comes to evangelizing, there's always a lot of, I guess, diligence in kind of assessing the situation. Is this person, I mean, it's the same for everything, right? When you debate about conservative topics like being pro-life, abortion, etc., you don't really want to engage with someone if you know that it's not going to go anywhere. So I think
Mhm.
you kind of use the same judgment with evangelizing. But to answer that shortly, yeah, I mean, you've got to convert everyone. I mean, with you should have the intention to anyway.
Yeah. No, I feel that. I wonder, what do you think is the biggest hesitation for Protestants? Do you think it's, I don't want to call it stubbornness, but I mean, what do you think that hesitation is? If you have you spoken to many who were at maybe interested in converting?
Yeah. So
Excuse me.
here's what I've observed. Really, it's that there are people who, because so much of my content is about, Protestantism, why Protestantism doesn't make sense, etc. And my observation has been, yeah, sure, I've had lots and lots of conversations with Protestants who are really interested in the faith, but usually there's, not to stereotype everyone, but usually there's a very clear kind of distinction between a Protestant who's truly, really interested and seeking truth. They're seeking more. And usually it's because they realize that, yeah, something's not quite right with the way I'm practicing my faith right now. And so they're at that point where they're really open minded and they don't really understand everything about Catholicism. There's a bunch of stuff that they probably think is heresy, but they're still
Mm,
open and they truly want to learn. And then on the other hand, there's just Protestants who just straight up have grown up believing a lot of lies about Catholicism. And it's really interesting because I think it's so almost, I wouldn't say uniquely American, because I think American culture has become very globalized. But I think part of my story is I never encountered anti Catholicism until I got involved with Americans.
mm,
And I think there's a strong anti Catholic sentiment within a lot of American, say, evangelicals or Baptists, because so much of what they grew up with it was lies about Catholicism. And I think that has so much to do with their resistance to the faith. So mostly, I think lies about the church. There's that famous quote, right? I think by Fulton Sheen. They're not how many 10,000 people who hate the Catholic Church, but what they perceive the Catholic Church to be. I'm not
mm.
getting the quote right, but that's the gist of it.
Okay. Do you get more of that animosity or more of that hesitation from Protestants, especially American Protestants? You get that online, or do you get that in person? Because what I've noticed is in person, people are more than willing to talk and engage, and they're more than friendly. But online, it's totally different. So I'm wondering if your interactions with American Protestants have been mostly online.
Yeah, mostly online, definitely. I mean, look, I'm all the way in Singapore. I've only been
Right.
to America once on one occasion. That was a great experience. But other than that, interacting with Americans online, American Protestants, it was definitely online. And you're right. Yeah, I think online people can be extremely direct. They will just say in your face stuff like, "Did you know that Catholicism is unbiblical?" Just out of nowhere, just bring that up, and you're
Right.
just having a nice chat, and like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
yikes.
No, no. Okay. So why Protestantism is wrong, or is that how you phrase it? How do you phrase it?
Why Protestantism? I don't think I usually go out there and say why Protestantism is wrong. How I like to put it is why Protestantism just doesn't make sense.
Ah, why Protestantism doesn't make sense. Okay, if you had to give us the cliff notes or a rough bullet point of a list Can you go down some points on why it is not making sense? Why it doesn't make
Yeah,
sense?
I wish I could have prepared something, but let's hope that all of my knowledge is still fresh on mind. Okay, so one
No, that's
would
good. Yeah,
be,
we don't want any preparation.
yeah,
Unless you're debating Jay Dyer, then definitely have all the books around you.
yeah. So first of all, it's just the idea that Protestants don't agree with each other on so many things, and one of the biggest things would be, I mean, look, let's just go down to fundamentals and
Mhm.
the idea that if we have one truth, if we have one God, that means there's one objective truth. If you have one objective truth, that means two things cannot be true at the same time. So you cannot you cannot say that something is neither right nor wrong, right? Or
Mhm.
rather, two people who confess to believe in the same God and the same system, aka who believe in the Bible and what the Bible says. Two people cannot say that they believe in the same thing but disagree on something, especially when it's fundamental, such as stuff like, I think abortion is a big one.
Mhm.
But a lot of, more conservative Christians will argue, yeah, well, that's obvious. Of course, we all agree. Okay, cool. Then we start to go lower and lower. What about stuff like contraception? I know that's a big topic that Franco was talking about.
Right.
Contraception. Protestants will definitely, across the board, have so many different answers. And then we get to even more complicated things like IVF.
Right.
What is one to say about IVF? What is the morality of IVF? People will say, "Oh, yeah, it's okay," and no, no, it's not okay. Both Protestants, they will disagree, and so to me, that just cannot make sense. That cannot be the way. And we also, when we look at it this way, we think of the first Protestants, Martin Luther, Calvin. They were vehemently against contraception. What else did they believe? They also believed in a lot of things about the Virgin Mary that
Mhm.
Catholics believe in, that Protestants today will not believe in, such as Immaculate Conception, her perpetual virginity. I mean, not all of the reformers believed in Immaculate Conception, but more of stuff like the
Sinless
fact that
life.
she's, yeah, sinless life, perpetual virgin, mother of God,
Mhm.
and whether we should intercede, ask her to intercede for us. Martin Luther said that we should pray with the Hail Mary prayer, basically. And so, if you ask a Protestant, why do you not agree the same things? Or why do you not believe the same things as Martin Luther did, as John Calvin did? Is it because Christianity is progressive? So if Christianity can change over time, then what does that say? What is
Right.
your faith going to be in 100 years down the road? How
Mm.
different is it going to look?
Can
And
you
I mean, I could go on and on, but
Right. Well, here's a question. Can one say possibly the same thing about Catholics? Like, oh, let's say you have two Catholics who are talking about abortion and they disagree. One of those Catholics is just objectively wrong, right? Within
mm,
within two Protestants speaking, it seems like it would just be a non-ending subjective conversation is if everything's just based on how you perceive the Bible or your own interpretation of it. But if two Catholics are arguing about abortion and one says no, it's clearly wrong, and the other one says, "Well, no, we support." There just can't be that disagreement because there's an objective truth, and the
mm.
church has stated its position on something like abortion for the last 2,000 years, right? Like, is that kind of where um, there lies the difference?
Yeah, for sure. I had a friend who put it, I like the way he put it. He said, when two Protestants disagree, it's like a Mexican standoff. And it's like,
Mhm.
who's right? Whereas when Catholics disagree, it's like, okay, let's pull out the catechism, let's pull out
Right.
official church documents, can point. And I think that's one of the distinctive features that make Catholicism different, is that you can point to the documents. Yeah, sure, different Catholics can say different things. You can have some liberal Catholic in New York who
Mhm.
grew up Catholic, but only goes to church on Christmas and say, oh yeah, Catholics, we're really progressive now, we accept gay marriage, and
Right.
you can pull out the catechism and say no. But if the Protestant says that, then it just can go on and on and on, and you can twist the Bible and reinterpret it however you please. And of you know and then this is when a lot of Protestants will say things like, yeah, but you've got to take into account the context, you've got to take into account the culture, and the context of how this verse was written, etc.
Hmm.
Then it comes back to the fact that no, Protestants always say that Catholics are unbiblical because, oh, da da da, and Catholics will take a Bible verse and say, there, see, it says so, this in the Bible, like confession. And then they'll go,
Hmm.
no, no, that's not what it really says. And then the Catholic can use the same argument and say, well, you see, you got to take in the context and how it relates to the rest of the Bible. So it's so much circular arguments,
Yeah.
really.
It just seems like so much more confusing. I'd rather have some sort of structure involved. Now, were you Catholic your whole life? Were you born and raised in a Catholic family?
Yeah, so I was born Catholic, raised cradle Catholic, as they say. And people like to ask, "Oh, were you a convert?" I don't know why people always ask that. I think it's because converts have this reputation for being a lot more outspoken about the faith,
Hmm.
especially, I guess, how much I talk about Protestantism is probably why. Sometimes I think it's because I'm Asian, and they assume that that you're not you weren't born Catholic because, I don't know, that's just my own conspiracy. But anyway, um, so yeah, born Catholic, and all my life I just sort of had this really, I would say, a childlike but yet logical faith. For me, Catholicism always made sense, and I didn't doubt it because it made sense. The Peter was the first pope, and then if you go to the Vatican, you see this lineage of popes all the way from Peter.
Hmm.
So that makes sense logically. Why would I care? Why would I doubt? You know, and also, as I mentioned, in Singapore, I never faced any anti-Catholicism. In Singapore, Protestants are kind of just known to be kind of a joke, to put it frankly, because everyone knows that Protestants here are all part of mega churches, and the pastors scam them with tithes and to buy private jets and stuff. The
Hmm.
typical kind of stereotype of a mega church pastor, essentially. And Catholics in Singapore are known to be the more respectable religious people. That, yeah, the Catholics are all super chill, they're cool. And so it was only, as I said, when I started interacting with American conservative Protestants that I faced so much heckling, essentially. People just saying to my face, Catholicism is unbiblical. Why are you Catholic? Why do you believe this? And when I was faced with all these questions on, like, show me where in the Bible, the famous line, I could never answer these questions. And that, well, it didn't make me doubt my faith, but it really challenged me.
Hmm.
And so through all of that, I think I was really, really forced to dig deep into my faith if I wanted to be able to defend it. And I think
Should
through
you?
all of that, yeah.
I was just gonna say, should we even have to defend it? Like, I was thinking about the
So
other day, if someone's like, "Why do you believe this? Why do you believe that?" Is it worth it just to say, "It's what I believe"? Is it worth it to actually defend it? Is it worth it to go through the whole church history just to prove a point? Or can you say, "It's what I believe," and move on? Or is that a weak thing to do?
I think if it was me today, so keep in mind when this was happening, I was like, what, 18, 19. So I
Mhm.
was still really, no, I've got to, defend myself. And I was fresh into really, the conservative space, the conservative Instagram space. And when
Mhm.
kids get into it, they can be really on fire for
Right.
debating and all of that stuff. So I think I was very much in that space. But I mean, I'm not complaining that I went through that phase. I'm happy about it. But I guess if that was me today, I probably would have done that and said, yeah, the Chad meme, the yes, and
Right.
just say that. But see, I guess my approach towards this and what most of my content is all about is being able to kind of counter not through a debate, but rather by because look, if someone comes up to you and asks you such a weird question like that, like oh, like well, why do you believe in Mary and being a virgin all her life, say, and I I think if someone asks you a question like that, you are kind of it's just being a decent human being to give an answer if you know
Mhm.
the answer.
Right.
I think the problem is more of when you don't know the answer, and sometimes that I guess that is worrying as well, which is another reason why I do what I do. But see, what I aim to do is for Catholics to be able to just respond back with a quick either they explain why and um no, see, I don't you're right. I don't think Catholics should have to explain because all they can do is type catholic.com and send.
Right.
Because look, that's another issue, right? I find that Protestants who say things and ask things, it's the most annoying thing about it is that Catholicism is something that you can look up online and see exactly what we believe.
Right.
Protestantism is different. We should be asking the questions because we do not know
Right.
what you specifically as a Protestant believe.
Mhm.
But aside from that, let's say they're really heckling. I hope that Catholics will be able to say something back like, well, Martin Luther believed it too. So the question is why don't you believe it? And then that usually gets them to actually dive deeper and realize that, oh crap, like okay,
Yeah,
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 maybe
not
I've
even
got
that, but
something wrong here.
just to say something along the lines of, "Oh, why do I pray to Mary?" Oh, well, Jesus Christ came to the world through Mary. So if one way I want to get to Christ is I can also go through Mary as well, I think isn't absurd but whenever I say that, it's always like, well, why don't you just go straight to God? And then sometimes I say, well, I like having a conversation with my mother every now and then. You know what I mean? There's something really special about that. We all know the relationships that, especially men have with their mothers. It's also nice to have a
Mm.
relationship with the mother of God, I think, in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful answer for someone who isn't too into the deep theology of it and isn't ready for a debate. I think it also is important to have that strength to be able to just give an answer like that.
Mhm.
The problem is when they're not satisfied with that answer, then, you know,
Well, I mean,
and
if
I think it's a but you see, I think it's a waste because I think all you have to do is plant seeds,
yeah,
either like saying go to catholicanswers.com or planting a seed of I wouldn't say plant a seed of doubt. That sounds a bit cynical, but
right.
plant a seed of curiosity. The idea that yeah, maybe there is more to this than what I've been told my entire life.
Mm. Oh, yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? What's the biggest religion in Singapore?
So Singapore is mostly secular.
Oh,
So
really?
it's mostly a secular country. But there's a big group of I would not say a big group. I would say rather there's a decent number of Christians, and within Christianity, Catholicism is the biggest, most prominent number, and I think also the most visible because, like, we have tons of Catholic churches. I think because when the missionaries came over, they did a really
Mm.
good job, and so if you go down to City Hall, you just have one cathedral, walk down another cathedral, walk down another cathedral,
Oh,
just
wow.
next to each other within walking distance. So it's like,
Mhm.
oh man, I'm late for mass. Oh, no worries. There's another mass going down the road in an hour's time. So it's pretty great that way.
Oh,
But
that's
in
awesome.
general, Singapore is not Singapore is on paper a secular nation.
Oh, interesting. So let's talk about America, because you say that you are involved in the American conservative
Was
space realm world. Um, so I wanted to ask you, because I saw, this one clip, I think is where I probably first found you, is when you and Franco were talking about free speech and the idea of free speech. And on this show recently, I've been saying, freedom of speech is pretty gay. I don't think that you should be able to express yourself freely, express yourself however you want to express yourself without consequences, especially when it comes to, especially in America now, when it comes to sexualizing children or pedophilia. So I can't remember exactly what your thoughts were about it, especially within the church. 'Cause I think you had made the argument of free speech within the church, and you were saying, no, there's no free speech in the church. Can you expand upon that a little bit, or just kind of jog my memory about what you were saying?
Yeah, it's really funny because I used to be such, I guess, what you would call a free speech absolutist.
Hmm.
Not to that extent, maybe, but I really valued this idea of freedom and the ability to do your freedom. It's a God given right,
Hmm.
and I think that was because I was brought up in such a society, or rather a government, that's known for really suppressing free speech. Journalists have been jailed, and the government does a good job with censorship, etc.
Hmm.
So I think because of that, and along with the idea that I was going through some stuff with, okay, I mean, so in Singapore, we've all got to do mandatory military
Military, right?
service.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, that was something that I had a big issue with, because I felt that for that was something that nobody questioned. Nobody questioned the reason we were doing it. Why exactly are we doing it? What do you actually do in there? Are you really doing this because to protect the nation? Is this really the best way to do it? For me back then, I just saw a lot of issues with it, and no one was questioning it. And for legal reasons, I'm not going to get into so much of the detail of it.
Sure.
But essentially, long story short, um, I think I'm one of the few Singaporean males that didn't do military service legally. So I can say that because legally I'm no longer obligated to do it. And
Oh,
for every
interesting.
other Singaporean male, they would be obligated to still go back every single year to do military training for 2 weeks. I don't
Yeah.
have to do that. So it was obviously a big thing among a lot of other things that in Singapore that caused me to get red pilled, so to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, essentially back in the day, I was really, really into freedom, and that's why I kind of almost idolized America and its ideas of liberty and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and all of that. And I think it came to a certain point where I realized that, again, my faith was more important. And through that kind of journey, realizing that this freedom stuff, it's actually really, really Protestant. This is
Hmm.
a really, really Protestant idea. This idea of free speech and all of that, the American idea of it, at least,
Yeah.
it's so Protestant, because I think one of the fundamentals of where this idea of free speech came from is, um, correct me if I'm wrong, but when the states were formed, they wanted to make sure that every state was able to kind of have their own laws, right?
Hmm.
To, I guess, interpret the law in whatever way they wanted to. And
Yeah.
to me, that sounds a lot like sola scriptura. That sounds a lot like letting everyone be able to interpret the Bible for themselves. And
Hmm.
maybe that's a stretch for me to say, and maybe this connection I'm making is just completely invalid. But I think nonetheless, just all this freedom stuff, it's really a really Protestant thing. And as I said on the podcast with Franco, Christianity is a canceling religion. We we've cancelled people throughout our entire history as a church. We've cancelled wrong ideas. We've cancelled heresy. Saint Nicholas, he punched Arius in the face because he was spouting heresy. We didn't give those guys freedom of speech.
Hmm. Yeah, no, not at all. And before the revolution in America. I think each colony had its own. Oh, let me get had its own. I guess. Not list, but each colony had its own laws, but were overseen by the British government. So it wasn't
Mm,
until after the revolution that they were able to form the Articles of Confederation and then start writing the Constitution. So it is interesting. I guess that was a very interesting thing, and I can't remember who I was talking to, but it was who was it? Was it Franco or was it someone else? But maybe it was Pine Sap. I can't remember, but I was talking to someone online, and he was saying, "Yeah, like Catholics were barred from voting after the
mm,
revolution, like after the Declaration, after the war, after the Revolutionary War. Yeah, Catholics were barred for some time from voting, and I haven't really done a deep dive into that, but I think that goes back to the roots of Freemasonry within the colonies and its infiltration of trying to get into the church and its successes and failures. I'm trying to read Pope Leo the 13th's encyclical about Freemasonry, and it's just why am I talking like that? I'm talking like a young like a Gen Z woman. The Pope and Freemasonry and the encyclical. I got to stop myself from doing that. It's awful. But yeah, it's very interesting the idea of liberty, pursuing happiness, freedom of everything, not freedom of what you ought to do, but freedom of what you can
mm.
do, is a very Protestant idea, and tying it to things like sola scriptura is very, very interesting. And I wanted to ask you if you thought that free speech was gay, and I think you probably answered that. I think you think it is.
I mean, it's funny that you put it in that sense of free speech is gay because, look, I mean, free speech has kind of led to, well, yeah.
Yeah, we see what's going on here. It's no surprise what freedom of speech can lead to. And I don't you always hear this, so I don't know if the founding fathers envisioned that this is what freedom of speech would have turned into. I'm pretty sure that, there were there heresy laws in the United States? I don't know if there were ever heresy laws, but there were definitely um what did they call those? Decency laws and things like that that
Mm,
would have, comedians arrested. There were, I forget the name of that famous comedian in the 1950s, but, you'd have comedians arrested for, speaking obscenities on
mm,
stage. People could be arrested if they're not wearing clothes outside. So there were decency laws that are
mm.
still on the books that just aren't enforced today, which is a very interesting thing. Let's move on from freedom of speech. Here's a question. There are a lot of divisions, I think, right now, even inside of the Catholic Church, especially with different types of Catholics. You have people like, let's say, SSPX. You have Catholics who go to church every Sunday with the Novus Ordo, and then you have your TLM Catholics, and you have your Divine Liturgy Catholics. Is there anything that can sort of bring us together? Or if there's one, I mean, obviously there is one thing, and that's God, Christ. But what do you think could sort of help to squabble the differences? It's almost like the same questions with Protestants. What do you think can help bring us together with Catholics?
Well, it's such a hard question because in in practice, it's gonna be so hard because you see, Catholicism by its very nature was made to unite us because look, we have the best system for unity ever. We literally have a singular anchor, which is the papacy, a singular figure, the Pope. Submit to Rome, submit to Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and hey, you're in the club. And with that, submitting to Rome, being a Catholic, means that you attest and believe to, and you believe in everything that the church teaches, everything that you're obligated to believe at least. So on paper, Catholicism shouldn't have any issues. And that's why I say it's completely different. The reason why Protestants are divided is because that's just how Protestantism is. Like, it's no
Mhm.
surprise. What did you expect? Sola Scriptura, interpret the Bible for yourself. What did you expect? But with Catholicism, that's where it's more like, because it's so much, I guess, misinformation, ignorance that comes into play, and not really understanding what the church teaches and what being Catholic means. And I think on both sides, I did a video with Daniel, the Jewish Catholic, and we did this entire spectrum of Catholicism,
Mhm.
of, on the extreme left wing end, the modernists, the heretics who want to have women priests, and then we have the other end, the rad trads, who go to the extent of just not acknowledging the papacy anymore. And so, to to answer that, I think, to bring us together, well, I think this is kind of what Christianity is. Going back to free speech, right? Christianity is a canceling religion. If we don't outline and define clearly what it is to be Catholic and what a Catholic should believe, then it's going to be very hard to unite everyone. So, I mean, look, within that big spectrum, and beautiful thing about Catholicism is that there can be some diversity in thought within the confines of the Catholic Church. And, that's always been a beautiful part about Catholicism, because you've got fences to make sure that you can have debate and dialogue and talk about issues, especially new issues that come up. Like, what should we do about, oh no, AI? And then
Mhm.
there's room for debate and discussion. And sometimes there are even things that we're allowed to have different opinions on, but there's always going to be a fence. And
Mhm.
so, long story short, I think we've got to learn to distinguish who's outside of the fence, and either, I wouldn't say cut them off, either acknowledge that so we can bring them back in, or keep them kind of, I don't want to say it this way because it's like saying, like, pissed off, but no,
Right.
that's not what I'm saying. It's more of, we've got to define what it is to be Catholic. And liking the Novus Ordo doesn't make you a modernist, and it doesn't make you a heretic.
Right.
And liking traditional Latin Mass and believing that the Latin Mass is better, that doesn't make you some schismatic anti-pope. I
Right.
think, to really understand that, and I think my social sphere, especially on Catholic Instagram, I think is full of really just normal Catholics who are really cool with each other, because, yeah, I have a lot of friends who only attend Latin Mass. But if I told them, oh, yeah, I attend at Novus Ordo every Sunday, they'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, cool, bro.
Right.
And same way, there's a lot of really hippie kind of modern Catholics that love praise and worship and all of that.
Mhm.
And they're like, if I told them, oh yeah, I love Latin Mass and I go almost every Sunday, they'd be like, oh yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I
Not
think
for
it's
me,
when
but
you
cool.
get,
Yeah.
and that's what Catholicism allows for. It's not even agreeing to disagree, because fundamentally you still agree.
Right.
Whereas with Protestantism, it's, you disagree and you're like, okay, yeah, we disagree, bye, and we're just gonna get along. But we kind of disagree. With Catholics, you can so comfortably agree to disagree, because you truly do agree
Mhm.
on the ultimate thing.
Yeah.
And you truly are like brothers and sisters in Christ, and united under the same communion. Communion is the word.
Oh, communion. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. What do you know what Pope Francis's underlying issue with the Latin Mass is, and why he kind of wants to, is the right word eliminated? I'm not too familiar as to, the really big whys. but I always hear rumblings on, he's trying to eliminate the Latin Mass. So do you know why, or do you know the reasons?
Look, I mean, when it comes to Pope Francis, I think the best way to put it is Pope Francis is kind of a in the and not in a I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but he's kind of a boomer. You know, Pope Francis is kind of a boomer.
Yeah.
And you know how boomers are. They don't necessarily have ill intent, but sometimes they do things and you think, why are you doing this? Why? Just why? And I think so much of that idea of when you look at Pope Francis as, of course, you look at him with the due respect of his title as the Vicar of Christ, but when you understand, he is kind of a bit of a boomer,
Yeah,
and
that
just
no,
give
that
him
makes sense.
benefit, you give him benefit of the doubt, you kind of understand that no, he's not doing this out of some evil intent. But from what I've heard, it's because I guess people in the Vatican believe that the rad trad movement is sowing division. And, at first I thought that was a really BS reason as to why they were doing it. But the more I've gotten involved, the more I start to realize that, yeah,
Might
like
be onto something.
they might be onto something. And that's not to say that they were right to do it. I think it is unreasonable because most of, like, yes, it is true that a lot of Catholics who sow division and are damaging, I guess, the Catholic unity in terms of, as I said earlier, the thing that unites as Catholics is we have a papacy, this perfect system that Christ left us.
Mhm.
And I think that's such a big threat to Catholicism. And I agree that these borderline sedevacantists who most likely are really pro Latin Mass are a danger. And I would even argue that, yeah, they'll say, oh, what about those modernists who are supporting all of these things against church teaching, like gay marriage, etc.? I would say that, yeah, that's a big problem too, but that's mostly out of ignorance and it's just kind of stupidity.
Mhm.
Whereas the sedevacantist position is a lot more active and vicious. It's a blatant rejection, and I think
Mhm.
so much of Catholicism is when you reject Christ, it's worse than just being dumb
Right.
and doing stupid things. It's when you actively reject that's the bigger problem. And so to go back to that, I'm not saying that they were right to do it because yes, sure, all these people, yeah, they're most likely attending Latin Mass, and that's where they hang out. But guess who else is also attending Latin Mass? The most faithful, fervent Catholics
Right.
who are completely in communion with the church, who completely acknowledge the authority of the Pope, who are just totally chill.
Yeah.
So yeah, essentially that is my take on the whole Latin Mass thing and Pope Francis.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I have to do more of a deep dive into that. Here's a Catholic mysticism question. I was thinking about this earlier today because I don't know if you've obviously heard about the Nashville shooting, which is local to me. And I was wondering, and I want to get your opinion on this. Do you think that children who suffer, go through, and die at the hands of evil, do you think that God makes them angels? Do you think he's maybe chosen these little ones to say, you suffered evil, terrible evil, and now your whole, I guess, I don't want to be a Calvinist and say the whole reason you were created was to die, but just saying like y- you are, I guess you're just an angel. Your whole purpose now is to help people who are suffering as well. And you are to be angels to them and to us. And I don't know if that was, a little kind of woo woo or whatever you want to call it, but I don't really know. I know that there's a whole history on angels. I think there's a specific word for it within the Catholic Church, the study of
Mm.
angels. It's not called like angelosity or angelicity. I don't know what it is, but I thought that could be a pretty comforting sort of thought to have, especially when thinking about kids who die young, that now their role is with God and their role is now very high up in heaven. What do you think? Do you think that that could be a possibility? I mean, we don't obviously know.
No, I think that's such a nice idea, but I think unfortunately, because angels by definition are a
They're not human.
different
Right.
creature. So,
Hmm.
the idea that we were told as kids that, oh yeah, when you die, you'll become an angel and have wings. That's something that I, as a kid, kind of envisioned to. I guess it's a very comforting idea to think that, oh, when I die, I'm gonna have wings. But I mean, first of all, it's the idea that angels have wings is not entirely true, as we know,
Right.
and just yeah, they're a different being. But I think the sentiment is there, the idea that children who die at the hands of evil kind of get a don't quote me on this dogmatically, but like a free pass to heaven, and
Right. Right.
they're in a better place now because I mean, when it comes to things like that, I like to think that, yeah, of course, Catholicism has all of the rules based on what we do know about God and what you should do if you want to get into heaven. But then there's also the acknowledgement that God can do whatever he wants. And this argument, this way of thinking could be taken out of context, but
Yeah.
also this idea that would a loving God send a kid who died at the hands of evil to hell?
Right.
And I
No.
think the reasonable answer is no.
Hmm.
So then, therefore, we can kind of safely assume that, yeah, these kids are most likely in a better place now. And that
Right.
is also a comforting answer. I think it is the same thing when it comes to stillborn babies who never got to be baptized. And, as the church teaches, is that you've got to be baptized. That is one of
Hmm.
their requirements to go to heaven. But also, there is, God's mercy is infinite. So there's a good chance that they are in heaven, even
Yeah.
though on paper, it's not really saying that, oh, yeah, like, of course they're in heaven. But
Hmm.
it's just acknowledging the reality and the facts. We can't make stuff up as Catholics. I
Right.
think that's something great about Catholicism is we can't make stuff up just because it feels good and it's comforting. And we've just got to acknowledge the reality that, yeah, based on what we know, we've got to be baptized, but God's mercy is infinite. And
Right.
therefore, I think we can safely rest in that comfort that these kids are in a better place.
Yeah. Do you think, oh, not do you think, but before we get into, there are a couple questions on Instagram, but um, what has been the hardest thing to not necessarily accept, but maybe wrap your head around, whether it's dogma, doctrine, within Catholicism? For me right now, I think it's the idea of purgatory. Like I'm really still trying to understand purgatory. What's something for you?
Oh,
For other
this is
people, it would be, the host literally becoming the body and blood of Christ. I don't really have. I think that's kind of right away. Like, yep, that makes sense for me. Purgatory is the one I'm kind of struggling with right now.
I think I am the worst person to ask this question to because I kind of consider myself to be one of those people who, yeah, whatever it is, if the church tomorrow said something absolutely ridiculous, I would probably say submit to Rome. If the
Yep.
church teaches it, then I believe it because what other option do I have? You
Right.
know, if
Oh yeah, and it's not
Catholicism
in the
ends up
sense
to
that I'm
be
like, yeah, and it's not in a sense that I'm like, well, I have to understand it in order for it to be true. It's
Yeah,
not like
for
that.
sure, for sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's just like wanting to understand it to the best extent that I can. So if pressed by, let's say, someone else of a different faith, I can explain it a
Mm.
little bit
Let me
accurately.
yeah, let me think. Let me think. I'm pretty sure there's been some stuff that I've went online to search about and just wasn't really satisfied with the answer. Uh, uh, I'll give one example. Okay, it's not really to do with so much about like say the Eucharist or anything, but it's just something I was thinking about. It's the idea that okay, Mary was immaculately conceived
Mhm.
and was sinless her entire life. And something that I started kind of thinking about was did no one kind of think something was off about this girl? Uh, like, like, would, how would someone without sin even behave?
Right.
How would someone without original sin even be human, feel human? Would they be like one of those super prudish, annoying people that no one likes? Would they,
Yeah.
how does someone born without original sin even act? Wouldn't that be so odd? And if so, like, how does that even make sense? To me, that's like, how?
Yeah, it just doesn't.
How's that realistic? It doesn't make sense. And then you think about Jesus himself, right?
Mhm.
Like, how does that make sense? Like a guy who's fully God and fully man.
Yeah.
How doesn't that make sense that he understood everything and went through everything we did? So and went through temptation, and it just makes no sense. But I think
Mhm.
going back to what being Catholic is, it's just acknowledging that it's a mystery. The word mystery is a big word in Catholicism, isn't it?
The mystery of faith.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that there were other more kind of more tangible issues, but if you had asked me before, I would have definitely thought of something. But right now, I can't think off the top of my head. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Let's get into some Instagram questions where you can't prepare
Oh.
for it. So let's see. This is from Catholic Caritas. Do you follow Catholic Caritas?
Oh yeah.
She's very nice. Does he think Catholic women should be non-assertive?
It depends on what you mean by assertive, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Um, if we talk about what does it mean to be assertive? Um,
Maybe would it mean to
like what does it
possibly
not mean? You think?
yeah, well, obviously, what would the opposite of assertive be? Would it be sheepish? Would it be, um sort of shy or soft spoken, maybe.
Mm.
So I guess the assertive role in the house would belong to the father, would belong to the leader of the household. But I guess in certain respects, I wonder if she's asking, are there certain or appropriate times where women can be assertive and not necessarily constantly submissive?
One example I can think of is if your boyfriend or husband is asking you to sin,
Mm,
then I think
yeah.
that's a real good time to be real assertive, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
So, in that sense, yeah, of course, Catholic women should be very assertive.
Yeah.
I mean, and of course, a lot of her content revolves around interfaith marriage, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
So, I guess maybe that is where the context is coming from. And I think if you are in an interfaith marriage, especially if you are the woman and you are the Catholic one in the relationship, then of course you've got to to be assertive because, as you said, in the traditional family, the role of the father is to be, the leader. And if you are in a situation where the husband isn't Catholic, And yeah, of course, you as the woman, as the Catholic, I think that takes priority that you've got to be the leader then. So
Mhm.
in that case, for sure.
Yeah. Yes. So Catholics involved in interfaith marriages, you must be the assertive one. Brianne Birch, this is the second. Well, this will be the last question only because there were two more questions, but they were worded very weirdly and I can't decipher them. This is from Brianne Birch. Is America's liberalism a reflection of the inevitability? Or no, sorry. Is America's liberalism a reflection of the inevitable end of Protestantism? Oh.
So, a friend once told me that Catholicism, like he's not Catholic, but he said Catholicism is the one thing that can save America
Mm,
because the one thing that America lacks is, in its freedom and liberty, etc. The one thing it really lacks is objectivity, objective morality. The I think subjectivity and Protestantism are so heavily intertwined with the whole idea of sola scriptura, etc., that I know it's a harsh way to put it, but
mhm.
so much of what's happening in America, I do believe, links to Protestantism because from Protestantism, it leads to subjectivism, and then from moral subjectivism, it leads to all of this stuff that's going on in America right now. So I'm not sure if that's the end or death of Protestantism, as they put it, but I would say that perhaps it will be a wake up call. And I think a lot of people, and I think you've spoken to lots of people yourself as well, who are starting to realize that all of this is. And I mean, someone that comes to mind is, I guess, the Nick Fuentes crowd,
Mhm.
the just this idea of at the end of the day, it's all about, submit to Christ. It's
Yeah.
not about these worldly ideas of freedom and liberty. It's actually all about, Christ.
Yeah, I think so. I think, getting involved in another one of my fads or, cool culture moments of the times. I don't know. I feel like it's not a bad thing to identify as a Christo-fascist, right?
What
Like I think
exactly is a
a
Christo-fascist?
Christo-fascist, I mean, if I look up the
See, I'm
definition of one, I'm
really
just gonna
out of
get.
touch with all of these terms.
Yeah, well, I think I'm probably going to get a bad one if I just look up, like a Wikipedia. Christian fascism is a term which is used to describe a far right political ideology that denotes an intersection between fascism and Christianity. It is sometimes referred to as Christo-fascism, and neologism, which is coined in the 1970s by the liberation theologian Dorothy Soleil. Yeah, I'm trying to get. I don't know if I was Christian fascism. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, if I was just to describe it, just like what is fascism? Isn't it just like a totalitarian government that controls
Mm,
all aspects of its society, right? I guess that would be
mm,
just the sort of dummies um, definition
mm,
of fascism, where it controls banks, it controls business, it controls commerce, it controls religion, it controls everything. But if then you were to say, I'm a Christo fascist, I would probably tend to define it as I submit to Christ. I believe we should live in a country that submits to Christ. And I believe that
uh,
that not necessarily the church runs the country, but the morals and values of the Catholic Church is what the country should be
based
led
on,
by.
yeah.
Yeah, or the best system of it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm
I think it just
like,
sounds
I don't know.
edgy. I'm a Christo fascist.
I don't know. In my personal opinion, identifying as anything besides Catholic is just cringe to me because it's like I identify as this, I identify as that. And
Yeah.
like, what are you? What are you trans? um,
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. I get that. Thank you
but
for exposing me.
but I see I see what you're saying about it,
Mhm.
and I think Franco and I also talked about you know monarchy and all of these things that I think in today's society are really villainized. Well, I mean, that leads me to another conversation that I've had about Catholics, or rather society in general, being just way too far removed from the idea of a monarchy. And they kind of forget that Catholicism is pretty much kind of operating as a monarchy because, I mean, monarchy, mono, one,
Hmm.
singular
Yeah.
leader. Yep. So I think society's been too far removed from it. And why you describe it and it sounds edgy is precisely because, yeah, in today's world, it is something that's super edgy when I think, is it really though? You know, submitting to a really singular objective morality system that says what is right and what is wrong, and that therefore dictates what a country's governance can do and what therefore everything operating under that should be allowed to do. Is that really that edgy? Oh no.
It's edgy in today's culture for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
People can't fathom that. Yeah. Well, listen, Gabriel, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. I'm sure we could have talked about a bunch of other topics, and we'll probably talk one day in the future. And maybe when you come to America, we can have you on the show in person. Maybe we can get Franco down. And I just want you to get some sleep because now it's almost 4:30 in the morning for you, or even getting closer to 5. So, Gabriel, just tell people where to find you. We're going to put all your links in the description. But before we sign off, just let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, my YouTube channel, just search up my name, Gabriel St Charles. My Instagram, where all of my Catholic stuff is at the Catacomb Diaries, and most things are linked there. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. You've had so many cool guests on, people I've interacted with in the past during my American conservative phase, and people that I look up to, like Matt Frad. And yeah, I appreciate you having me on virtually because America will not let me in because I'm not vaccinated, which is really backwards.
Oh,
So much for land
Lord.
of the free.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry about that. I do
Only
not
country
associate
that
me
does
with that.
this.
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, Gabriel, get some sleep. Thank you guys for watching. Everybody like, subscribe, comment, share, and we'll see you next time.